The Platonists of antiquity assigned to demonology a definite place in the structure of the master's thought. Modern interpreters are too enlightened to take Plato's statements on the subject very seriously. But how are we justified in regarding as mere play what is said about the demons if we consider the physical and physiological doctrines of the Timaeus, or the philosophy of language of the Cratylus, as integral parts of Plato's system? By the mere fact that we have a contemporary science of nature and language, but none of demons, the Cratylus is much more like a medley of merry pranks than a scientific treatise in linguistics. And the mixture of myth and natural science in the Timaeus might have caused a scientist like Democritus to shake his head. As a matter of fact, there should be no doubt that, in his writings, Plato does not teach a science in our sense of the word. And while what the characters in his dramas say about the world of demons is certainly play, it is, like all play in Plato's works, of a deeply serious nature. If anyone, however, should venture to express this underlying element of seriousness in his own words, Plato would probably protest. This much I know, if it ought to be written or said at all, it had better be said by me in my own words. Letter 7. Plato encountered the demonic dimension when he encountered Socrates. For this man who, more than any other, proposed to clarify by the power of his intellect what was unclear and ambiguous, recognized mysterious forces which he obeyed without examining their claim. He liked to talk, and often did, about his daimon or daimonion, a peculiarity that was so well known that the authorities used it as a basis for the indictment against him. He was charged with the introduction of new demonic beings. We shall not turn to psychopathology to inquire into the nature of this daimonion, nor join Schopenhauer in his attempt to assign it a place among dreams, seeing ghosts, and other occult phenomena. It would be still more inappropriate to try to explain this extraordinary phenomenon rationally by calling it the inner voice of individual tact, an expression of spiritual freedom, or a sure measure of one's own subjectivity, thus confining it to our rational and social world of experience. Indeed, we are already closing off a possible approach by calling it the daimonion, as if it were an object, instead of using the neutral Greek expression, the demonic, which, on the one hand, expresses an element of uncertainty, but you do not know whence it comes and whither it goes, and on the other, indicates that this force is not within and at the disposal of a person, but is received from a larger sphere external to him, and acknowledged with reverence and awe. On yet another level, there is the divine. Plato, in the speech of defense, even makes Socrates connect the two and call the phenomenon a divine and demonic element, and even the sign of the god. In Xenophon's presentation, Socrates states that this power counseled or instructed him beforehand what to do or not to do. The only instance in which a clear effect may be observed is when Socrates is about to prepare his defense. Then the power opposes him. Read from Memorabilia, Book 4. The element of resistance and inhibition is particularly emphasized by Plato. There is no reason to give more credit to Xenophon's rather general description than to Plato's careful delineation, even though Plato may have accentuated and systematized. At least, it is plausible that Socrates was most keenly aware of these active powers when he was faced with obstacles. Goethe, too, if we may call on him as a witness, was at times inclined, though he also held different views, to respect forces of resistance turning to one's advantage as demonic elements, which one worships without presuming to explain them. That the voice never counsels positive action is expressed in the Apology, and in the same words in the Theaeges. In a later passage of the Theaeges, it is said that the demonic power lends support or cooperates, which does not indicate that the dialogue is not of Platonic origin. The author must have thought the two conceptions compatible with each other. In the silence of the demonic, Socrates might also have felt and recognized an element of positive cooperation. Plato first introduced the daimonion into his portrait of Socrates as a trait just as characteristic of the strange man as his turned-up nose and protruding eyes. Socrates himself says in his speech of defense that it appeared frequently and opposed him even in trifles. Thus, we are not surprised, without forgetting that we are reading the report of Socrates, a master of irony, when we are told in the Euthydemus that the sign of the demon prevents him from rising, thus causing his encounter with the quarrelsome fencing masters. We are even less surprised when, in the Phaedrus, the sign does not permit him to leave before he has made amends to Eros with another and more truthful speech. The Theaeges proves the genuine effect of the voice by relating a number of incidents in which the warning came true. When Charmides was training for the Nemean Games at the time of the murderous designs of one Timarchus, and at the disastrous departure of the fleet for Sicily. It is very significant, however, that these events are not considered ends in themselves. The Theaeges certainly does not intend to make a sort of miracle man out of Socrates. Socrates himself states the purpose of telling these stories. Because this demonic power is all important for communion with those who seek my company. For there are many whom it resists. They cannot benefit from intercourse with me, and I am not capable of such intercourse. In many cases, it presents no obstacle to companionship, but the persons concerned derive no aid from it. But if the demonic power participates helpfully in the relationship, the companions immediately find themselves on the path of progress. Similarly, in the Alcibiades, since it is concerned with a first encounter, long delayed and rich in consequence, we are again reminded of Goethe's words to Eckermann. The higher a man is, the more he is under the influence of the demons, and he must constantly take heed lest his guiding will chance upon a wrong path. There was altogether something demonic in my acquaintance with Schiller. We might have been brought together earlier or later, but that we met just at the time when I had the Italian journey behind me, and Schiller began to be wary of philosophical speculations, this was important and highly beneficial for us both. Again, the situation in the Alcibiades major is quite similar. Master and disciple could have been brought together sooner or later. Socrates has long kept himself away from the youth because of the resistance of the demon. Meanwhile, he has observed him. And now the voice is silent, and he addresses the youth. In the language of the Theaeges, the demonic co-operates, or, as the Alcibiades puts it, since the active force is to be more clearly defined, the God who hitherto held me back has now sent me to you. It would be pedantic to ask whether the daimonion and God are one and the same in this context. They are, and they are not. We are dealing with active powers, not with names. Since education, the most important enterprise, is at stake, the demonic is particularly significant. Both elements are combined in the Theaetetus. Socrates speaks of his skill as a midwife, and of different effects of this skill, how some men leave him prematurely, to the detriment of what they have borne or still carry unborn within them. As a typical example, he names Aristides, the son of Lysimachus, who also occurs in the related context of the Thyaeges, and whom his father, in the Laches, presents to Socrates. In the Theaetetus, it is then said, "If they return, desiring my company and behaving very strangely, the demon which comes to me prevents me from joining some of them. It lets me be with others, and these again make progress." Thus it becomes clear why Plato considered this characteristic a more important part of Socrates than his turned-up nose and protruding eyes. In Xenophon, we tend to think of a special little oracle that gives rather random counsel to its owner and those in his company, such as to do one thing and not to do another. In Plato, the demonic in Socrates determines primarily his educational mission. It is not merely a remarkable peculiarity of a single individual, but an integral part of the nature of a great teacher. As an extralogical influence, it protects education progressing within the realm of the logos from becoming a purely rational pursuit, and secures a connection with that element of mystery which is lacking in the sophist's instruction. Thus Plato must have regarded it as part of the normal, not as something abnormal. He obviously felt such a power within himself, and must not something of it perhaps be felt by all who were called, and not merely appointed, to educate human beings? The Platonists of later periods often discussed the nature of the Socratic daimonion. We have treatises on the subject by Plutarch, Apuleius, Maximus, and Proclus. All of them try to explain this particular phenomenon by taking it out of its isolated position, that is, by establishing a connection with other demons, particularly with that demon which, according to widespread belief, accompanies a man through life and, according to the Platonic doctrine, remains with the human soul even beyond its earthly existence. Perhaps even today it is not absurd to talk about such things, for it is not ghosts and specters or theurgic and magic rites that we are concerned with, but real powers, even though in Iamblikos, Proclus, and elsewhere the boundary lines are often blurred. Before we dismiss this subject as superstition, we should at least think of Dante's hierarchy of angels, which ascends through many ranks to the throne of the Supreme Being, or recognize, in the light of the last book of Dichtung und Wahrheit, the Gespräch mit Eckermann, and the Urwort Orphisch, how much the demonic or the demon meant to Goethe, who was always striving to achieve clarity. In Plutarch's dialogue about the daimonion of Socrates, a childishly crude confusion of the Socratic daimonion with such phenomena as sneezing or as soothsaying voices, used for the purposes of popular divination, is replaced by a more profound view, probably originating in Poseidonios. As human speech affects the ear, so the logoi, to retain this equivocal term, of the demons directly affect the human soul. What ordinary people experience only in the relaxation of sleep is given to human beings with a pure, serene soul, whom we then call holy or demonic in their waking lives. Such a human being, free from disharmony and turmoil, was Socrates. A Platonizing myth, then, seems to reveal what Plutarch means by demons. Timarchus, hidden in the cave of Trophonios, learns through the voice of an oracle that the demons are the stars he sees floating above the darkness, that is, the purest part of the reason. In especially favored individuals, the part that is excluded from the mingling of soul and body. As the corks float above the net, so the demonic star floats above the human being, and his soul is fastened to it, whether willingly or reluctantly. It is a Stoic doctrine, though with Platonic overtones, this notion of the logos, perceived without senses, penetrating all and uniting macrocosm with microcosm. The actual demonology slightly changes the Platonic element, though even the Platonic form of the myth is used. According to the Timaeus, the god gives to everybody a demon as part of his soul. Its seat is the head, which is akin to heaven, and therefore prays toward it. And this divine element must be cultivated so that man keep the demon in an orderly habitat and become eudaimonic. What, from a logical and psychological point of view, is called reason is here reverently related to the highest form of existence. With this doctrine of the Timaeus, Plutarch appears to have combined what Plato wrote about the demon in the myths of the soul. In the Phaedo, the demon who is given to man in his life leads him to the last tribunal after death, and to Hades after judgment has been passed. Another demon, then, guides him upward again. In the myth of the Republic, the situation is reversed. It is the soul which, restricted but not determined by the accident of the lot, prior to its incarnation, freely chooses its way of life, and thus its demon, as the fulfillment of the choice. There are not different doctrines of Plato's. These are not different doctrines of Plato's. Plato does not state dogmatic doctrines, least of all about demons. Rather, in order to present imaginatively something of his own experience so that it may be grasped by others, he combines at one place the popular belief in a demon accompanying man through life with his own insight into the human soul, and at another place with Orphic images of the beyond. Demon first means something like the innate human form. Today, it might be called existence, the element that remains constant throughout all the accidents and flux of life, that which makes any action of mine my action. Heraclitus already had revised the popular belief in this ghost-like companion in his saying, "Man's character is his demon." But Plato thought he saw more and could express more in a myth. This character is not confined to man's earthly life. It follows him across the boundary of the beyond, stands with him before the tribunal, and leads him to the place of punishment. For judgment and atonement are strictly related to the way of life adopted on earth. Again, that way of life is not imposed from the outside. Man has brought it with him, across the threshold of birth, from a previous existence. The myth of the Republic, by proclaiming the freedom of individual choice, and by referring to the words of Moira, that guilt lies with the chooser, establishes metaphysical responsibility, and thus seems to be a direct correlation of the Phaedo, which permits a fatalistic interpretation, dangerous to moral action. The demon will not cast a lot for you, but you will choose the demon. Thus the demon is, in Plato's world, a symbol not only for that which Goethe respected as a special power, so muss du sein, Urwort, but also for the mysterious and inexorable bond between human life and the beyond. The choice of the demon, given to us in the myth of the Republic, symbolizes the transcendental freedom of Kant, that freedom within necessity of Jaspers, which is peculiar to human existence. It is as if I had chosen beforehand the being that I now am, quote by Jaspers. At the same time, the correspondence between demon and nous shows how Plato, despite his insight into the darker elements, reserves the ruling place for the active intellect. In his later years, Plato liked to indicate the order and objectives of the political life of man by measuring it against a mythical world of perfection. The myth of the statesman presents such a perfect world cycle during which the highest god cared for the cosmos. A mythically glowing passage in the Laws presents it as the golden age of Kronos. In both instances, this state of perfection is communicated to human beings living in society through the mediation of divine demons that have divided all living beings into species and herds, so that peace and lawfulness, for example, eudaimonia, should reign among their subjects. In the Laws, the conclusion is drawn that only the dominion of God, and not that of a mortal being, can protect the human states from disaster, and that we must strive, by means of the immortal element within us, to regain the perfection of the Golden Age. In The Statesman, the myth is continued as follows. If the supreme power withdraws his hand from the helm, permitting the world to reverse its course according to its inherent law, and primal disorder recurs, then the other deities also leave those parts of the world of which they are guardians, and we humans are deprived of the care of the demon who governs us. Here the demon does not belong to the individual, but to the community, acting as an intermediary between it and the cosmic or divine, for example, the highest form of existence. It is easy to see how this demon of the community can be reconciled with the demon of the individual, especially when we think of the correspondence between nous and demon in the Timaeus. But we are not concerned here with combining the elements found in different contexts into conceptual unity. We merely wish to recognize what is common to these mythical symbols. The last examples also show how close a connection exists between the words demon and God, so that only human imperfection, as it were, makes a distinction necessary. The Statesman calls the supreme power the greatest demon, and those subject to him are called deities sharing his rule. Certainly we cannot distinguish the divine demons from the ruling gods, the former evidently being named with Hesiod's man-protecting demons in mind. Consequently, the famous argument of the Symposium, according to which Eros is not a god, but a great demon, must not blind us to the fact that, while god and demon may mean different things in Plato, they are also very close to one another, and may even merge into one. The subtle and rigid distinctions of later interpreters remind us of Goethe's remark that the original teachers are still conscious of the insoluble core of their project, and attempt to approach it in a naive and flexible manner. The successors are inclined to become didactic, and their dogmatism gradually reaches the level of intolerance. Plato, on the contrary, still shows how the same things may be seen and named differently. Reason, cognizant of itself and its own elements, is referred to as nous, pure thought, understanding. Piety, worshipping the same thing as radiance from perfection or the good, calls it the divine. Just as in Alcibiades Major, knowledge and thought are called the most divine parts of the soul, and God and thought, in close juxtaposition, together form all the divine. And the very same thing, vaguely felt and named by the awe that senses these incomprehensible and inescapable powers, is called the demon. God and demon are so close in Plato that the dividing line finally disappears altogether, except where, as in the Symposium, they are expressly distinguished for a special purpose. We must also bear in mind that he always rejected as unworthy an excessive rigidity in the choice of terms, and the quarrel about names when matters of such importance are at stake. From the Republic. The Platonists of a later period, however, were all too inclined to give way to word worship and dogmatism. Even at the end of Plato's own lifetime, the living myth began to wither before the schematism of a demonology entering, as in Philippos of Opus, into a strange union with the physical doctrine of the five elements, or, as in Plato's successor, Xenocrates, with the geometry of triangular forms. Later thinkers, similar in general approach, though differing in detail, began to incorporate Socrates' daimonion as a special case into a whole order of demons, or into a hierarchy of cosmic forces and cosmic beings. Maximus of Tyre assigns numerous tasks to the 30,000 demons that he takes over from Hesiod. And the one chose this body, and the next another. One Socrates, another Plato, still another Pythagoras. For Proclus, Socrates' daimonion belongs to the highest rank of demons, the divine demons. Plato does not think in terms of such schemata, but as he certainly referred to objective facts, and not to words only, Ai dice cose e voi dite parole. So he must have seen demon and the demonic as belonging together, like divinity and the divine. And nobody can say how much of the ideas and speculations of his own school he would have rejected, in annoyance or with a smile, as attempting to grasp the incomprehensible in too rigid a formula, and how much he would have accepted with friendly indulgence. These demonologies, from Philippos and Xenocrates to Iamblichos and Proclus, retained throughout the centuries a common view, which, in fact, stems from Plato, and must have been of the utmost importance to him. It is the idea or view of the demonic as a realm intermediate between the human level and the divine, a realm that, because of its intermediate position, unites the cosmos with itself. Diotima mentions this realm at the beginning of her myth about Eros, and makes it the scene of all intercourse between gods and men, and therefore of mantic and priestly art, ritual, and magic. These customs and rites Plato, however little he may have used them himself, still accepted as a symbol for a hidden realm of higher existence, and therefore, also, as an intermediate or mediating world. Co-ordinate with this realm is the demonic man. Below it is the Banausic man. Above it, implied, though not explicitly stated, is the man endowed with divine wisdom. Only the Symposium developed the intermediate realm of the demonic in the concrete form of a myth. As a prelude to it, we may take the myth of the soul in the Phaedo, where the demon, whose function it is to lead thence, accompanies the soul first to the tribunal, and then to Hades, whence another guide leads it back on its return. We are also reminded of the myth of the soul in the Republic, where judgment is passed at a demonic place between heaven and earth, and of the faint echo in the Timaeus, where the demon, the controlling element of the soul, lifts us from earth to kinship in heaven. In the Statesman, the souls themselves are a demonic species, receiving divine knowledge of the beautiful, the just, and the good. It is always the metaxy, or intermediate, which is the symbol for the demon, or the demonic, and this is seen in still clearer outlines in the myth of Diotima. It is a myth, to be sure, and the Platonists were quite wrong to make a dogma out of it. On the other hand, to say that it is nothing but a myth is equally wrong, and evades the question of what the point of the myth is, a question that must be asked even though there is no final answer. Plato would not have chosen the form of a myth if he had been able to find a perfect expression in the form of a logical concept. It is easy to show the genesis of this idea. Homer and Hesiod created the Greek gods. That is, they lifted Olympus and the heaven of the gods out of the realm of demons. Even though Plato still uses the words gods and demons interchangeably, he adopted and systematized this idea of two distinct ranks, placing the demonic as a sort of proportional mean between the human level and the divine. More difficult and important, however, than this background is the question of the purpose for which Plato needed and used this conceptual structure. Among the very different approaches to a Weltanschauung in the European tradition, which was essentially influenced by the thought of classical antiquity, we may distinguish two basic views, seen perhaps in particularly sharp contrast to one another when we compare a landscape by Dürer with one by Rubens. Just as the former leads in distinct separate sections or layers from the foreground to the back, so the latter leads in continuous, homogeneous movement into the depth of the picture. And this difference in form expresses a contrast in the view of the world. For it makes a basic difference whether the world is viewed as a limited and leveled structure or as a homogeneous spatial continuum. This dual view also appears in antiquity, though it is obvious that the idea of structure belongs much more to the classical view than the idea of a continuum. Thus, in Plato, we may compare the threefold structure of his concept of the soul with the modern concept of the soul as infinite energy, or his state, built upon three classes, with that of abundance of mutually supporting or conflicting forces that we usually have in mind when we use the word state. Structure requires that its elements hold together. That two things of themselves form a good union is impossible, says the doctrine of the elements in Timaeus, for there must be a bond between them, holding them together. The best bond is one that makes itself and the elements it connects into a complete unity. To achieve this most perfectly is the nature of proportion. Thus, the fourfold nature of the elements is constructed by continued geometrical proportion, and from these four elements, the body of the world was created in harmony with itself by means of the law of proportion, and it won friendship so that coming into unity with itself, it became indissoluble by any other save him who bound it together. This is the structure of nature insofar as it is governed by the laws of physics. And the more sharply Plato's world was divided into idea and appearance, the stronger must be the bond forcing the separation into a unity. Thus, the human soul is seen as intermediate between idea and appearance. The doxa in the three levels of knowledge as intermediate between knowing and not knowing, becoming as intermediate between being and not being, or as a path leading from one to the other. Dianoia, the world of particular sciences, lies between pure knowledge, or the world of ideas, and mere opinion, or the world of fleeting appearances. Without the proportion of the elements, without the harmonious system of the forms of being and knowledge, without the metaxy of the soul, without the realm of the demonic, heaven and earth would break asunder. The Socratic daimonion must have been for Plato a part of the demonic, as the name indicates. He does not say so explicitly, for the myth of Diotima is concerned with Eros. And yet, daimonion and Eros, the inhibiting and the driving force, cannot but appear as fundamentally akin. In Plato, it is a natural kinship, not a matter of functioning parts in an intellectual system. We must be careful not to go beyond his own statements more than is necessary. We must, however, call attention to Proclus, for even though this latest disciple tends to force the master's spontaneous images into logical categories and lives in an entirely different intellectual atmosphere, his absorption in Plato's thoughts, images, and words is still incomparable. Of Socrates, Proclus not only says, Socrates is at once an erotic and a demonic person, but adds, the demon is to him altogether responsible for love. Even if this statement throws too sharp a light upon a subject that Plato chose to leave somewhat obscure, it still expresses a real insight, which Plato himself would hardly have denied. And perhaps we may again find a confirmation in Goethe, speaking from an entirely different world, yet expressing a profound affinity. Not merely we are the love, he said to Eckermann on March 5th, 1830, but also the beloved object that charms us. And then, what we must not forget, we have as a powerful third element the demonic, which accompanies every passion and which finds its proper element in love. Again, not merely we are the love, but also the beloved object that charms us. And then, what we must not forget, we have as a powerful third element the daimonic, which accompanies every passion and which finds its proper element in love. Returning to Socrates, he lived, as we have seen, in every respect the life of Athens. It was the life of a city-state, which, not unlike the Italian city republics of the later Middle Ages, had inherited a declining aristocratic culture and absorbed much of its nightly customs. Founded on the customs of Doric warriors, the city-state is also political, as it were, and this society, the most productive the world has ever seen, is completely filled with male love on every level and in all its manifestations, from the most passionate devotion to casual play, from loftiest adoration to crudest sensuality, rising to the heights of creative power as it survives in Greek art, and reverberating in the halls of state, as it causes the fall of the house of the Pisistratidae through physical desire and jealousy. No doubt, Eros was for Socrates an original and living experience. There is, for example, the story about Zopyros, the founder of the science of physiognomy, who saw sensuality and lust for women expressed in Socrates' features. The story is well substantiated. It probably appeared in a dialogue composed in Socrates' own circle. This fact alone demonstrates, more than anything else, the original nature of his erotic drive. How powerfully it was expressed by inclination and custom, especially directed toward boys and young men, is fully confirmed by all the statements from the circle of Socrates. Plato's dialogues are full of this. Even if we make allowance for Plato's effect upon his companions, it is unthinkable that the real Socrates was an unerotic, because completely rational, character whom Plato, in a paradoxical reversal, by the force of his own entirely different nature, transformed into the type of the loving educator. In the Alcibiades of Aeschines, Socrates compares his love for Alcibiades with the divine ecstasy of Bacchic maenads. As they draw milk and honey from dried wells, so he hopes to improve the beloved friend by his mere presence. Nor is this element lacking in Xenophon. The memorabilia, to be sure, say little about it. Their apologetic and moralistic attitude was probably disturbed by this dangerous power, and wherever it occurs, it is changed or diverted. But the statement, he often said he loved someone, is probably closer to the truth of the matter, all the more so as it is presently given a bourgeois moral interpretation. It was clear, however, that his desire was moved not by youth, excelling in physical beauty, but by those favored with excellence of the soul, virtue, unquote. In a long conversation with Critoboulos on how to win friends, Socrates interrupts rather suddenly, quote, "Perhaps I can assist you in your pursuit of the beautiful and good, because I am a lover myself." For when I desire someone, I give the whole strength of my being to be loved by him in return for my love, to arouse longing in return for my longing, and to see my desire for companionship reciprocated by his desire." Unquote. This is just a brief interlude, quickly to disappear again in the patter of moralistic exhortations. Xenophon's banquet, lighter, livelier, and more dramatic than the memorabilia, conveys by its free invention a greater sense of life and even of reality. Thus one of his drinking companions suspects Socrates of the vain conceit that the youths of the company desire his kisses, or Charmides says teasingly that in writing school, Socrates had sat down beside the beautiful Critobulus, reading from the same book, only to bring his head close to the others and to touch Critobulus's bare shoulder with his own. Socrates' speech in praise of Eros begins by calling all companions fellow revelers of the god, and by saying of himself, "I could not name a time when I was not in love with someone." All this, to be sure, is still little enough as compared with the abundance in Plato. But is this not the most realistic and simple explanation? That Xenophon only described but did not experience what he wrote, while Plato was bound to depict Socrates as an entirely erotic character because he had experienced the god or the demon in contact with the master. Friendship and love are always mutual in their fulfillment, though they may originate only in one person. This Plato shows primarily in the Lysis or the Alcibiades, and then in the great dialogues on love. Convinced of this, could Plato transform Socrates into an erotic character and have him teach the mutuality of all friendship and love, if, in the passion of his own youth, he had met in him a man devoid of love? In Plato's Thyaeges, Socrates counters the professional teachers of wisdom with the ironic reply, "I know nothing about these lofty matters. How I wish that I did. But, as I am always saying, I am quite ignorant in general, save for one small subject, the nature of love." Similarly, in a passage from the Symposium, Socrates refers to himself, "I say of myself that I am ignorant about all things except the nature of love." The more limited statement in the Lysis also belongs in this context. "Ignorant as I am in all other things, God gave me the power to recognize one who loves and who is loved." If we consider these statements, which strikingly combine the Socratic eros, Socratic ignorance, and Socratic irony, we must conclude that Plato recorded a fixed figure of speech, a habitual saying, of the historical Socrates. And even if we reject this conclusion, and it is, of course, impossible to prove because Plato's Socrates almost hides the historical figure, the nature of the Platonic Socrates is completely revealed in these words. Thus, the following discussion must now turn upon the great lover as revealed in Plato's dialogues. In the Charmides, Socrates has just returned, the previous night from the military campaign. His first walk leads him to the accustomed meeting places, to the Palaestra. After giving a report on the campaign, his first question is directed at what he considers more important than anything else. What is the present state of philosophy at home? Have young boys grown up excelling in intelligence or beauty? When Charmides enters, admired and pursued by all, Socrates admits that, for measuring beautiful youths, he is like a white line on a white surface. He cannot, as a red line does, distinguish among them. All youths appear beautiful to him. Charmides, to be sure, appears particularly admirable in stature and beauty. And in the manner of Lysis, where he seems to pride himself on his expert knowledge, he continues, "The general amazement of the grown-up men was not surprising, but even the boys saw only him, and looked at him as if he were a divine statue." We must not overlook the irony of this passage. Socrates pretending he cannot make distinctions, but what shines forth unmistakably through the ironic concealment is a passionate love for beauty. Later, Plato will say that the beautiful body evokes a memory of the original vision of beauty through the eye of the soul. The boys, the men, Socrates himself, are all confused and as struck by lightning. No one has a right to weaken these strong words or to say that Socrates is only playing a part. His feeling for physical beauty was as strong as in others. What distinguishes him from the others is that they are satisfied with physical beauty as an end, while Socrates requires an additional small point, namely, that Charmides also have a noble soul. When Socrates misses a small point, it is always the decisive thing. Nobility of mind does not detract from physical beauty. Together they produce the perfect nature. The same tension and movement recur presently. Charmides sits down beside Socrates and looks at him expectantly. Then I saw what was inside his garments, and I was aflame and beside myself. And I thought how well Caidius understood the nature of love when, in speaking of a fair youth, he warned someone not to come as a fawn in the sight of the lion to fetch his share of the meat. All this may be taken quite literally, as is shown by the glance at veiled nakedness, even though we may also detect a hint of gentle self-mockery in these strong poetic words. As soon as the conversation develops, however, it becomes clear that both good and evil for the body, and indeed for man as a whole, proceed from the soul. The subsequent discussion remains on the level of the soul, dealing with sophrosne, the moderation and discipline of the beautiful soul. In the opening passages of the Protagoras, the companion remarks teasingly that Socrates has probably come from the chase after Alcibiades' youthful beauty. Socrates enters into the mood and proves well versed in matters of love. But something strange has happened. Although he, Alcibiades, was present, I paid no heed to him. Indeed, I often forgot him completely. And what caused him to forget was that there was someone more beautiful, Protagoras, for wisdom is beautiful. This is jest, of course, jest throughout. That does not mean, however, that love, even the physical love for Alcibiades, is but a mask. It is quite genuine, a step toward the practice of philosophy, just as, in the Charmides, the physical beauty of the youth was a step toward the nobility of the soul, in himself and in general. Thus the ascent of love as well as wisdom, described by Diotima, takes its point of departure from physical beauty, later to rise toward beauty of the soul, where, to be sure, even a small flower of the body suffices. This is Platonic and Greek in feeling, in contrast to Nietzsche's words that the fairest body is but a veil, modestly donned by things more beautiful, where the little word but sounds an echo from an entirely different world. The Alcibiades, more than any other dialogue, demonstrates the contrast between Socrates' love and that of other men. The many lovers who had pursued the young man left him when the flower of his youth began to fade. Socrates, who had long observed him, now approaches him for the first time. This curious difference forms the starting point of the discussion, and the solution is found at the end. The others loved only the body, not Alcibiades himself. Socrates, loving the soul of Alcibiades, is the only lover. This is the way in which the argument is presented in conceptual form. But this isolation of the love of the soul emerges only in the contrast to the common sensual love. Socrates' love is truly an all-human phenomenon. Perhaps we feel affection of the senses is not lacking when Socrates, in the beginning, refers to the beauty and stature of the youth. At any rate, what is hinted at here could certainly be supplemented by the Protagoras and the Symposium. Moreover, the sensual element is not merely mask or veil. It is a stepping stone to a higher level, but a necessary stepping stone, whose absence would make that higher level inaccessible. Still another insight is conveyed by this encounter more clearly than in any other work. Alcibiades has felt the silent observation by Socrates as annoying. It is a strong word, and we sense the annoyance, but also the curiosity with which he almost anticipated the approach by Socrates. In the end, however, after the first pedagogic conversation has run its course, the relationship between the two has changed, and from the words of enthusiastic attachment, Socrates concludes rightly that his love for the disciple has, quote, after the manner of storks, hatched the winged fruit of love, and must now, in turn, be cared for by the other's love, unquote. Where passion encounters the right object, it must necessarily engender passion, and whether more strongly or weakly, Socrates always has this magnetic power. When he enters the palestra, the boys soon surround him. They sit on his bench. They blush when he addresses them. In the poignant words of the youth in the Thyages, my greatest progress by far came when I sat next to you and touched you. For the first time, the lover addresses the youth whose sight has long moved him. Are they talking about the, quote, I, unquote, and the, quote, thou, unquote, and the force that brought them together? No. Instead, their conversation is concerned with learning and self-improvement, with the state and effective action in the state. Instead of being praised by his lover, the haughty youth feels tested, humbled, educated. This is the Socratic conversation about love, the genuine dialogue, as against the false talk by others. In the Lysis, after giving a similar example, Socrates says, quote, that is the way, my dear Hippothales, in which we should talk to the beloved, humbling and lowering him, and not as you do, puffing him up and pampering him, unquote. Testing of the soul and guidance towards arete and polis are the proper subjects between lovers for both Socrates and Plato, probably more profoundly akin and less distinguishable on this point than on any other. And the Platonic Socrates expresses a general principle often confirmed by other great sayings. By Hölderlin's, mortal man gives his best when he loves. By Goethe's, we learn only from those we love. By Nietzsche's, the deepest insights spring from love alone. These sayings, collected by Ernst Bertram in his book on Nietzsche, complement each other. Hölderlin was thinking of the teacher, Goethe of the disciple, and Nietzsche of the product of this union. All three elements are found in Plato. Let us now turn to the third. Eros brings two people together. If these two are Socrates and Alcibiades, they will philosophize. This others saw. Plato saw more. He saw the power of the great demon extend to a new dimension. Not only does the lover teach and the beloved learn, it is their love from which the deepest insights spring. Thus Eros becomes the guide to the idea. This is the truly Platonic turn. It remains, by necessity, an interpretation of the Socratic existence. This Platonic turn first appears in the Lysis, where Plato, in the form and on the level of an early work, discusses those questions which the Symposium later transfers to a higher level. The subject of the conversation is friendship, but behind this word it is clear, as will be briefly sketched, hides the more powerful eros. The atmosphere pervading the conversation is erotic. Moreover, Socrates confesses that the quick recognition of lover and beloved is his only gift. Indeed, Socrates may say of himself that, from the time of his youth, his erotic passion has been devoted to acquiring friends. There is hardly any terminological distinction between love and friendship, so that first, desire is said to wish that of which it is in want, and then that the congenial be the object of, quote, love, friendship, desire, unquote. The dialogue deals with the nature of friendship, that is, at first with questions such as whether affection may be one-sided or must be mutual, whether friendship unites like with like or unlike with unlike. In short, the conversation stays on the dimension between the I and the thou. Only toward the end, after a long dialectical and apparently fruitless exchange, Socrates calls attention to a most important point. Affection exists for the sake of an object. Its intentional nature, to use modern terminology, becomes visible, and this object is something dear or good. Moreover, since every good may be superseded by a higher good, the search is an ascent to the highest object of love, or to that which is good in itself and not for the sake of another. Thus, proceeding from the I-thou dimension, a new dimension has been reached. The eidos is in sight. Socrates' speech in the symposium points to this intentional nature of love right from the very beginning. Love aims at something. This relationship apparently is necessary in order to grasp the demonic element beyond the hymnic festival, the myth, and the music of words in its philosophical or conceptual meaning. This formal element has a content because the beautiful and the good are recognized as the object of the intentional act. Thus, the objective dimension is grasped from the beginning. And as if conceptual clarity had thus received its due, Socrates now resumes his tale in the solemn language of prophecy by the priestess Diotima. Love longs for procreation and beauty, whether physical or spiritual, and this desire for procreation is a longing for immortality. As love desires that it may forever partake of the good. Beginning of one soul in another occurs when the lover comes upon a beautiful soul in a fair body. What he begets is virtue, which he nourishes in the soul. We see how the I, the thou, and the object are concentrated in this act of procreation, and how the two dimensions we recognized are clearly outlined. The same basic relationship is repeated on a higher level. The dual movement toward the beloved, and with him, toward virtue, becomes a gradual ascent leading to the intuition of ideas. At first, we desire physical beauty. From here, we progress in stages of which none may be omitted, until we finally reach that which is beautiful in itself, of single form and eternal. Love has found its highest fulfillment. The deepest insights have sprung from love, but even the view of the highest idea of beauty still reflects its origin from the encounter between the I and the thou. Beginning and end are both under the aspect of the same great demon. A still clearer view of the necessary connection between the two dimensions, the unity of the erotic experience and the vision of ideas, is presented in the Phaedrus. The moment at which the vision of beauty awakens love is like a double ray falling from the realm of ideas into our world of becoming and passing away. For he who sees the beautiful remembers the pure beauty, which every human being, as part of being human, has seen in the realm beyond the heavens before he was born. He sees beauty in the other because he perceives features molded in God's image, or a body resembling the original image of beauty. The awe he feels in his divine adoration of the beloved are like a gleam of silver in which memory and image awaken each other, and the path is clear to the realm of ideas. But this is only the beginning. Different kinds of human nature, bequeathed to the souls from their following of a god in the heavenly realm, or, in non-mythical terminology, the creative law of the individual now pursues different paths, seeking in others what is akin to himself. Thus love makes the soul conscious of its innate divine element, the highest type of soul, a follower of Zeus, conscious of its destiny for philosophy and ruling. Love compels it to look toward Zeus and shape itself according to his image. Zeus means the highest form of divine existence in the view of the eternal forms. For the divine has its own hierarchy, as in Dante's Paradiso. This hierarchical structure determines the hierarchy of man on earth, and of all human community in love. The love of philosophers for each other and for the idea is a function of Zeus's contemplation of the ideas. Only the world beyond helps us to comprehend how the highest form of love may lead directly to philosophy, or philosophical education of the congenial partner. Just as genuine love, coming from the highest God, is true education toward the highest God. The loving encounter of two human beings belonging to Zeus, that is, two philosophers and rulers, at once includes the new dimension, the movement toward the idea. Loving desire is part of the philosopher's name. Now, while a sexual element is, at least potentially, always present in Eros, even the quest for truth and the penetration to truth may for a moment, as in a passage of the Republic, be felt as an act of begetting, just as the begetter must be of the same nature as the object of his love. So the lover of truth must approach true being and touch it with that part of the soul, almost with that organ, which is akin to true being. The true nature or being of the soul combines, in an act of creative union, with true being or form, akin to the nature of the soul. And just as true sexual union not only begets but creates, so the knowing self too must create. What? Mind and truth. The child bears the features of both parents, but, unlike a natural birth, the product of this union is not external to its parents, but the lover of wisdom himself, after this kind of procreation and birth, is as one, quote, who has now attained insight and now truly lives and grows united with it, unquote. Insight and knowledge thus grow as part of one's own existence, not separate from it. It is, quote, existential, quote, insight, and indissoluble union of insight and life. Quote, and then pain will have an end, unquote, Socrates concludes, once more evoking the basis of the simile of procreation and birth. Why is Eros not called a god but a great demon? What is the common element of demon, daimonion, Eros? They do not designate complete being, but rather aspects, movements, and powers leading toward such being. Eros, too, is part of the world of metaxy, transition to a beyond of the soul in a double sense, first uniting the I and the thou in dialogue, and then raising them both to the level of the eidos. In the power he called Eros, Plato saw the dual, yet united, movement toward the beautiful person and the idea of beauty. Erotic experience and knowledge of ideas are indissolubly united. This is not a matter of conceptual thought, but the formulation of direct personal experience. Confirmed by a long life, it is still implied in Plato's words when he was an old man. In the 7th letter, Plato talks about the things to which he is committed most wholeheartedly. They are not communicable in language as other objects of knowledge, but, after a long communion and common effort on behalf of the matter, a fire is suddenly kindled in the soul, as if lit by a flying spark, and henceforth can nourish itself. This, to be sure, does not convey the idea, or no longer does so, that the philosopher gains the path to knowledge through the experience of love. Here we hear only about communication, not discovery, of the highest truths. But where is the line of distinction? Even for the old man, every communication is an act of creation, and from the inexpressible nature of the highest truths, it would seem to follow that the doctrine is not rigid, but an unending quest. We mentioned before that Plato, from inner necessity rather than theoretical construction, saw a systematic connection between eidos and polis, as well as between eros and eidos. This means that eros and polis are also inextricably united. Plato thought of Socrates as the only true statesman because he was a teacher inspired by love. Plato himself, the discoverer of the realm of ideas and the founder of the academy, owing to the historical situation, recognize the primacy of the political life. These facts alone show unmistakably that the Platonic Eros and his guidance toward the idea do not merely satisfy individual inclinations and deeds, isolating the individual from the life of the community. There is no arete and paideia without a political meaning. We cannot overlook the political overtones in Diotima's statement that love inspires the teacher with ready speech on, quote, what the perfect man ought to be and what he ought to do, unquote, which becomes still more explicit when, beside the poetic works of Homer and Hesiod, the laws of Lycurgos and Solon are mentioned as the finest examples of intellectual creation. The Republic, finally, teaches that Eros and Eidos are effective only within the polis, just as the polis, in turn, is founded on Eros and Eidos, for it is founded around the agathon, and Eros is the union of its rulers in their striving towards the center. Man and polis are part of the cosmic order. Without Eros, heaven and earth would break asunder. Thus, the function of Eros is fulfilled only within the widest possible context. The demonic realm, says Diotima, unites the all with itself. This is merely a hint, for in this passage, Socrates, speaking through Diotima, is referring to man. But Phaedros has conjured up the cosmogonic Eros of the ancient poets at the outset of the speeches on Eros. Eryximachos has shown in Eros to be active not only in men's souls, but in the bodies of all living beings and in vegetation, or quite generally in all forms of existence, as the power reconciling hostile opposites, such as cold and warm, bitter and sweet, dry and wet, ruling in harmony and reaching into the cosmic order. Aristophanes, finally, expresses the hope that Eros, in the future, will lead the divided fragments of men, descended from the heavenly bodies, back to the former state, that is, will restore us to the state of original perfection resembling that of our creators. This is poetic play, to be sure, but what is the point of the play? That things strive toward and desire the Eidos, so that Eros is the bond between them, is stated with a higher seriousness, though still in half-mythical form, in the Phaedo. The Phaedrus, again, speaks the language of myth. The vision of the eternal forms is the highest aim of divine and human souls. The, quote, desire for the beyond, unquote, is the motivating power. The wings, borrowed from the god of love, are symbolic of the striving which pervades and unifies the world. Other mythical themes predominate in the myth of the creation in the Timaeus, which probably explains the absence of the cosmic and cosmogonic Eros in this dialogue. If we wish to grasp the full depth and meaning of Plato's Eros, it is helpful not only to consider the level beyond which Plato rose, the Socratic level, but also the sublimation and decentralization of the Platonic world as we find it in Plotinos and later in Platonists. On the Socratic level, as we may say, with the full realization of the ultimate doubt of what we mean by Socrates, Eros is effective within a single dimension, between loving and philosophizing men, an active force driving them in an unending quest, or existential communication, to use Jasper's words. Plato adds to this Socratic force an objective element, if not a system, at least a striving toward an objective system. This will help to make clear how Plotinos failed to retain this force and content. For him, Eros only means movement upward to the highest one, a man of whom his pupil Porphyry says, in the first words of his biography, Plotinos, the philosopher of our time, was like one ashamed to be in the flesh, could not regard the union of physical love as the creative point of departure for philosophical activity. The distance between Plato and Plotinos is most evident when the latter apparently follows the master most closely. Plotinos attempts to show the path leading home from aimless wandering, that is, to the place of trust, belonging to the soul, to the good and the one. It can be reached by a man endowed by nature with love and of a true and original philosophical inclination. Such a man suffers a painful struggle for the sake of beauty, but not being able to endure physical beauty, he flees from it, upward to the beauty of the soul, the virtues, knowledge, actions, and universal principles, thence upward to the cause of spiritual beauty of the soul, until he reaches that which is still higher, the one, beauty in itself. Only then will he be free from painful struggle. This is almost the same ascent that Diotima describes in the Symposium, with one great exception. In Plato, everyone taking the right path must first love one beautiful body, and generate in it beautiful words. Then recognize the one beauty in all beautiful bodies, becoming a lover of all. No one may omit these preliminary stages, beyond which leads the soul's path to beauty and upward. Plotinos no longer recognizes these stages. To him, the ascent actually begins when man turns away from physical beauty that his soul does not endure. The soul of Plotinos is alienated from this world, and his concept of disembodied spirituality is far separated from the abundance of Plato's spirit. Pausanias' speech in the Symposium, long before Socrates takes the floor and reduces all previous speeches to insignificance, divides the apparent unity of Aphrodite and Eros. There are Aphrodite Urania and Aphrodite Pandemos, each with her son Eros. This dualism has never died since, and is also implicit in Plotinos. But the latter again draws a distinction between the two realms quite different from that of Pausanias. And this difference again shows up the distance between Plato and Plotinos. For Pausanias, the division runs through this world, separating nobility and vulgarity in the love between human beings. This is not Socrates speaking, to be sure, and the separation is not final in Plato's sense. Yet he would never have drawn the line where Plotinos drew it. For the latter, love is the necessary drive of the soul for union with God, from whom it has come and is separated. Like a virgin, it bears noble love for a noble father. Upon reaching its goal, the soul possesses divine Eros and itself becomes heavenly Aphrodite. If it becomes immersed in the world of becoming, however, accepting mortal love, separated from the Father, it becomes Pandemos itself and adopts, as it were, a hetaira's life. Earthly life and earthly love are a fall. The soul must hate this outrage and cleanse itself from this life to return to the Father. Thus, it is consistent to conclude that love is actually meaningless within the world of phenomena. Love is born when the undivided soul creates a non-sensible prototype. Thus, love between human beings is no longer, as in Plato, a necessary stage, but merely a mark of weak-minded souls. He who does not know the state of true love, the union with the Godhead, may realize from the experience of earthly love what it means to attain that for which we most long. The earthly lover's desire for physical union is but a feeble copy, an imitation of much greater experiences. The prototype, however, true love, is the union of the soul with the highest God. In this, the soul then sheds its own form, for as long as it is still in its own state, it can neither see the highest being nor merge into harmonious unity with him. Only when it has shed these obstacles, prepared itself for the encounter, and become like the highest being, is there a sudden perception within. There is nothing in between. They are no longer two, but have merged into one. As long as he is present, we cannot distinguish one from the other. Thus, unio mystica not only leads to a contempt of the delightful instrument of the body, it also extinguishes all spiritual form. This is eros according to Plotinus, far removed from Plato's.